The Colonial Parkway is a stretch of asphalt that winds through the historic triangle of Virginia like a dormant snake, burying itself under a canopy of oak and pine that blots out the starlight. By day, it is a picturesque route connecting Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown, a scenic drive for tourists soaking in the birth of a nation. But when the sun dips below the horizon and the heavy humid mist of the York River crawls up the embankments, the road transforms. It becomes a tunnel of isolation, a place where the darkness feels almost pressurized, pressing against the glass of your car windows, daring you to look out. Imagine you are 19 years old, sitting in the passenger seat of a car parked at a secluded overlook. The engine is off. The only sound is the rhythmic, distant lapping of the river against the rocks and the unsettled rustling of the wind through the dense tree line. You are there for intimacy, for a stolen moment of privacy away from prying eyes, believing that the solitude is your ally. You feel safe in the bubble of steel and glass, hidden by the night. Then, a pair of headlights sweeps across the rearview mirror, blindingly bright, cutting through the fog like a knife. A car pulls up behind you, close, too close. The lights don't turn off. You squint, trying to make out the silhouette behind the wheel, but the glare is overwhelming. A door slams shut, a heavy, metallic thud that echoes in the silence. Footsteps crunch on the gravel, slow and deliberate, marching toward your driver's side window. You feel a sudden spike of adrenaline, that primal instinct screaming that something is wrong. You wait for a voice, a ranger, a police officer, anyone to explain the intrusion. But there is no voice. There is only a shadow looming over the glass, a figure devoid of features, holding the power of authority or the weapon of a monster. You reach for the lock, but hesitation has already sealed your fate. The window rolls down, perhaps trusting a badge that isn't real, or perhaps forced by the barrel of a gun. In that split second, the scenic overlook becomes a slaughterhouse, and the silence of the Virginia night is about to be shattered by screams that no one is around to hear. This is not a ghost story fabricated around a campfire to scare children. This is the blood-soaked reality of the Colonial Parkway. For 4 years, a phantom predator stalked these lovers' lanes, turning vehicles into tombs and the river into a graveyard. He hunted couples. He left no witnesses. And to this day, he has never been caught. Tonight, we drive into that darkness. Welcome to the heart of the American nightmare, where the sprawling wilderness hides secrets that refuse to stay buried. We are delving into one of the most frustrating and chilling cold cases in the history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Colonial Parkway Murders. Between 1986 and 1989, 8 young people were targeted in a series of brutal slayings that terrified the state of Virginia, turning a historic landmark into a corridor of death. These were not random acts of robbery or crimes of opportunity. They were calculated executions, marked by a level of cruelty and efficiency that suggested a killer who knew exactly what he was doing. What makes this case truly haunting is the sheer variety of the violence utilized by the predator. Some victims were strangled, their throats slashed with surgical precision. Others were executed with firearms at close range, and some simply vanished into the ether, leaving behind pristine cars with keys still in the ignition, as if they had been raptured from the earth. The inconsistencies in the method of killing are baffled by the consistency of the entrapment, leading investigators to a terrifying hypothesis. The killer knew how to control the scene before the violence ever began. The theories run deeper than a simple drifter or a madman in the woods. The evidence points toward a predator who could hide in plain sight, perhaps someone who wore a uniform. From rumors of a rogue CIA operative to a jealous police officer, the identity of the monster remains elusive. Drifting like the fog off the York River, we are going to dissect the timelines, the lost evidence, and the terrifying profiles of a monster who effectively weaponized the trust we place in authority figures. This channel is dedicated to the macabre, the unsolved, and the stories that keep you awake at night. If you have the stomach for the truth and want to support the investigation into the darkness, I need you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we are just getting started. Go ahead and click the like button to help this story reach more people. These victims deserve to have their names remembered and their stories told. And before we descend into the madness, I want to know where you are joining us from tonight. Scroll down to the comments section right now and tell me which country and city you are watching from. Is it a bustling metropolis or a quiet town near a dark stretch of road? Let me know in the comments below. Now, lock your doors, Check your back seat and prepare yourself. The nightmare began on Memorial Day weekend, 1986, a time when the humid air of Virginia hangs heavy with the scent of blooming magnolias and the exhaust of holiday traffic. Kathleen Thomas, a 27-year-old graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and her girlfriend, 21-year-old Rebecca Dowski, a senior at the College of William and Mary, sought refuge from the world. They were brilliant, vibrant young women with promising futures, simply looking for a quiet place to talk and be together. They chose a secluded pull-off along the Colonial Parkway, near the Cheatham Annex, a naval supply depot. It was a spot that promised tranquility, overlooking the dark, glass-like water of the York River. They were driving Kathleen's white 1980 Honda Civic, when a passerby noticed the car days later, pushed slightly down the embankment into the thick brush. It didn't look like a crime scene, it looked like an accident. But as authorities approached the vehicle, the illusion of a traffic mishap disintegrated instantly. The car hadn't crashed, it had been discarded. Inside the hatchback, the scene was one of absolute carnage. The two women were found in the back of the car, bound with rope, strangled until the life was choked out of them. And then their throats were slit so deeply that they were nearly decapitated. The brutality was staggering. It wasn't just a murder. It was an act of extreme, visceral rage. There was no sign of sexual assault, and their wallets and money were left untouched, ruling out robbery or a crime of opportunity gone wrong. This was personal, or it was the work of a maniac driven by a hatred that defied logic. The killer had taken the time to douse the bodies in the interior of the car with diesel fuel, likely in an attempt to torch the evidence, but the fire had failed to ignite. The smell of unburned fuel mixed with the copper temps of blood created an olfactory nightmare for the first responders. What chilled investigators to the bone was the lack of struggle. The Honda Civic was a small car. A fight for life would have shattered windows or dented the frame, yet the car was intact. This detail birthed the most enduring and terrifying theory of the Colonial Parkway murders. The killer had control. How does one man control two athletic, intelligent women without a fight? He tricks them. If a figure approaches your car in the dead of night holding a flashlight and wearing a uniform, you don't panic, you comply. You roll down the window. You hand over your license. You lower your guard just enough for the trap to snap shut. The autopsy revealed defensive wounds on Kathleen Thomas, suggesting she eventually realized the ruse and fought like a warrior in her final moments. A clump of hair, likely from the killer, was found in her grasp, a silent testament to her defiance. But in 1986, DNA technology was in its infancy, a tool of the future that could not save them then. The case went cold almost immediately, leaving a stain of fear on the community. The Parkway, once a lover's lane, had been christened with blood, but the monster wasn't finished. He was just refining his methods. The fear had just begun to settle, fading into a dull caution, when the monster returned more than a year later. It was September 1987. David Nobling, 20, and Robin Edwards, 14, met up for a secret rendezvous. Robin had snuck out of her house, a classic teenage rebellion, to meet David. They drove David's black Ford Ranger pickup truck to the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge, located near the James River Bridge, a desolate, marshy area on the south shore of the James River, geographically distinct from the first murder but spiritually connected by the isolation it offered. 3 days later, David's truck was discovered by a patrol officer. The scene was eerie, a tableau of interruption. The driver's side door was swung wide open. The radio was still playing, broadcasting songs to an empty cabin. The windshield wipers were beating back the morning dew, clicking rhythmically in the silence. The keys were in the ignition, the engine cold but ready. Inside, their clothes were neatly folded, and their shoes were left behind. It was as if they had been raptured, plucked from the truck in the middle of a moment. The search for David and Robin ended tragically along the shoreline of the James River, their bodies washed up separately, battered by the tides and the scavengers of the deep. Unlike the first victims, they had not been strangled or slashed. They had been executed with a firearm. David had been shot in the shoulder and head. Robin had been shot in the back of the head, an execution-style wound that suggested she was fleeing or kneeling when the trigger was pulled. The change in modus operandi from a knife and rope to a gun threw investigators off. Was this the same killer, or a copycat inspired by the darkness? Despite the difference in weaponry, the psychological signature remained consistent. A couple in a vehicle, a secluded location near water, no robbery, and total control of the scene. The open door and the running accessories of the truck suggested a sudden confrontation. Once again, the question arose, why would they exit the vehicle? If a stranger approaches your truck in a dark refuge, you lock the doors and drive away. You only get out if the person demanding it carries the weight of authority. The timeline was also haunting. The murders happened during a weekend, just like the first. The killer operated on a schedule, perhaps a 9-to-5 worker who transformed into a predator when the work week ended. The Ragged Island murders solidified the theory that a serial killer was operating in the Virginia Tidewater area. The media frenzy began. Parents locked their doors. Teenagers were warned to stay away from the lovers' lanes. But the warnings were futile against the allure of privacy. The killer knew human nature. He knew that desire would always override fear, and he was patient enough to wait for the next car to pull into the darkness. April 1988. The terror escalated from discovering bodies to the agonizing horror of the unknown. Cassandra Hailey, 18, and Keith Call, 20, were on their first date. It was supposed to be a night of awkward excitement, of getting to know each other. They went to a party in Newport News and left together in Keith's red Toyota Celica. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. The narrative of the Colonial Parkway Murders was about to shift from brutal discovery to a haunting vanishing act that remains unresolved to this second. The next day, Keith's Toyota was found at the York River, overlook on the Colonial Parkway, only a few miles from where Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski had been slaughtered 2 years prior. The car was a ghost. The driver's door was open. The keys were dangling in the ignition. On the seats, investigators found Keith's and Cassandra's clothing. Think about the implication of that detail. Their clothes were there, but they were gone. No blood, no signs of a struggle. Just a silent vehicle overlooking the river, standing as a monument to their abduction. This disappearance introduced a new, terrifying dimension to the case. In the previous murders, the bodies were left near the vehicles or found shortly after. Here, the killer had taken them. Had he forced them to strip at gunpoint? Had he made them drive to a secondary location? Sniffer dogs tracked their scent from the car to the water's edge, where the trail abruptly evaporated. Did they enter the water, or were they loaded onto a boat, taken away into the vast, dark network of waterways that define the region? The absence of bodies allowed the imagination of the public to run wild with gruesome possibilities. Without remains, there was no autopsy to determine the cause of death, no bullets to analyze, no knife wounds to measure, just a void. The FBI intensified their involvement, bringing in profilers and forensic experts, but the lack of physical evidence was a wall they could not breach. The car was processed for fingerprints, fibers, anything but the killer was a ghost. He left nothing of himself behind. For the families of Cassandra and Keith, the pain was a different kind of torture. There was no closure, no funeral, no grave to visit. Just the endless gnawing hope that perhaps they were still out there, followed by the crushing reality of the statistics. The couple's killer had struck again, and this time, he had essentially erased his victims from the face of the earth. The parkway was no longer just a crime scene, it was a black hole. The pattern seemed undeniable now. Every year, a new tragedy. In September 1989, the cycle of violence claimed its final known victims. Anna Maria Phelps, 18, and Daniel Lauer, 21, were not a couple in a romantic sense, but friends. They were driving Daniel's gold Chevrolet Nova from Amelia County to Virginia Beach. They vanished during the Labor Day weekend, another holiday, another weekend, fitting the killer's temporal signature perfectly. Their car was found abandoned at a rest stop in New Kent County, near the I-64 exit ramp. But there was a bizarre detail that didn't fit. The car was facing the wrong direction. They were heading east to the beach, but the car was parked heading west, as if they had been turned around or led astray. Once again, the keys were in the ignition. No struggle, no blood, just an empty shell of a vehicle left to taunt the police. The car had been there for weeks before it was properly identified, allowing the elements to wash away potential evidence. It wasn't until 6 weeks later that the gruesome discovery was made. Turkey hunters moving through a dense logging road in the woods about a mile from where the car was found stumbled upon the remains. The bodies of Anna Maria and Daniel were in an advanced state of decomposition, covered by a blanket from Daniel's car. The skeletons revealed the grim truth. Anna Maria had been stabbed, marks on her bones indicating a violent end. Daniel's body was too decomposed to determine a definitive cause of death, but the proximity to Anna Maria told the story clearly enough. This crime scene differed slightly from the others. They weren't on the parkway itself, and they weren't in a lover's lane. They were in transit. This suggested the killer was evolving, becoming bolder, perhaps pulling people over on the highway rather than waiting for them to park. The police impersonator theory gained even more traction. How do you get a car moving on the highway to stop and turn around? You flash blue lights. You use a badge. You use the inherent trust people have in authority to lure them to their deaths. The condition of the bodies and the remote locations suggested the killer knew the area intimately. This wasn't a transient drifter. This was a local, someone who knew which logging roads were overgrown, which patches of woods were rarely traversed. He had taken them there, executed them, and left them to rot under the autumn leaves. With the discovery of Phelps and Lauer, the official count rose to 8 victims. For double homicides, for years, and 0 arrests. The most chilling aspect of the Colonial Parkway murders is not the gore, but the psychology of the encounter. In almost every case, the victim's reaction was not to flee, but to interact. Windows were rolled down, wallets were out, cars were pulled over neatly. This behavior points a trembling finger at one terrifying conclusion. The killer presented himself as law enforcement. In the late 80s, dash cams were non-existent. Police procedures were less scrutinized. If a car behind you flashed its high beams or a mounted spotlight, you pulled over. If a man in a uniform or something resembling one walked up to your window, you didn't assume he was a serial killer. You assumed you were getting a speeding ticket or a warning for parking in a restricted area. This killer weaponized trust. He turned the symbol of safety into an instrument of death. There were suspects, of course. The FBI looked at rogue officers, security guards, and obsessive types who frequented the parkway. Theories swirled about a CIA operative due to the proximity of Camp Peary, a covert training base known as the Farm. There were rumors of photos from the crime scenes being leaked, used as trophies or warnings, but every lead hit a dead end. Evidence was mishandled in the chaotic jurisdiction battles between the FBI, state police, and park rangers. DNA samples degraded or were lost. The profile created for the killer was that of a sexual moralist, someone who targeted couples because he felt they were sinning, or because he was envious of their intimacy. He was organized, meticulous, and likely drove a vehicle that looked official. He may have collected souvenirs from his victims, the missing clothes of Keith and Cassandra, the wallets, the licenses. Today, the case remains one of the darkest stains on Virginia's history. New DNA technology has recently reopened doors that were rusted shut, with families pushing for advanced testing on hairs and fibers found decades ago. But the shadow of the parkway remains nameless. He could be your neighbor, a retired man tending to his garden, holding the memories of 8 lives in the recesses of his mind. Or he could be dead, taking his secrets to a grave that no one knows. The Colonial Parkway is still beautiful today. The trees are taller, the asphalt is smoother, and the tourists still flock to see the history of America. But for those who know, the beauty is a mask. When the sun goes down and the fog rolls in off the York River, the road reclaims its sinister atmosphere. The silence is heavy with the weight of the unsolved. We drive past these overlooks without a second thought, but somewhere in the darkness, the truth is waiting. 8 lives were stolen, extinguished by a predator who vanished as effectively as the mist. The Colonial Parkway murders serve as a grim reminder that safety is often an illusion, and that sometimes, the monster isn't hiding under the bed, he is the one tapping on your car window, asking for your license and registration. Until this case is solved, the ghosts of Kathleen, Rebecca, David, Robin, Keith, Cassandra, Anna Maria, and Daniel will never rest, and neither should we. Keep your doors locked. Keep your eyes on the rearview mirror, and whatever you do, never trust the shadows. I'll see you in the next nightmare.